Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel today. Today I have a layout that I made using the December My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. For this layout, I took a whole bunch of scraps of paper that I had from making other layouts with the papers in the kit, and I cut them into 1/2 inch strips. In addition to using scraps of paper, I also used some of the branding strips from the pattern papers in the kit. I'm using some Distress Oxide in Mowed Lawn, and I'm inking the edges of all of these scraps of paper. I'm going to take all of these strips of paper and I'm going to attach them down to this piece of white cardstock. This piece of paper is 12 inches wide by 6 inches high. I drew some 45-degree angles, and that's very easy to do because the piece of paper is 6 inches tall. I measured over 6 inches on the bottom of the paper, and then I connected the corner to the line that I drew, and then I did the same thing again. I measured 6 inches over from the top, and then I drew a diagonal from that mark to the bottom right-hand corner. I hope that makes sense. But of course, you don't have to use a 45-degree angle. You could use any angle that you like. I used some ATG adhesive and I attached down the strips of paper, and now I'm cutting off the excess. Some of those longer strips I'm going to use to finish up covering this piece of 6 by 12 inch paper. The papers that were in the December kit were from two different manufacturers. There was a 49 and Market paper collection. There was also a Blue Fern Studios collection, and I just love the way these two collections go together perfectly. It's almost like an exact match, and I never would have thought to combine two different collections, but that's one of the many nice things about getting the kits. You don't really have to do anything but create. All of the thinking and coordinating is done for you. I have that strip of paper completed now. I have it attached down to a scrap piece of 12 by 12 inch paper. And now I'm tearing one of the 49 and Market papers. I have a piece on the top and a piece on the bottom, and then my photo is going to go in the center. Now, I don't end up using this photo. I end up using it for another layout that I made in December. I instead use two smaller photos, and I place them to the right where that 4 by 6 inch photo is now. I have those pieces of paper that I tore cut to size on the top and the bottom, and I use scissors, and then I also use some bending and tearing, and I distress the edges of both of them. Using strips of paper from the kits and putting them next to each other is something that I love to do. I love the way it looks when there are a number of the pattern papers from either the same collection or collections that coordinate right next to each other like this. I think it just brings together all of the colors and all of the patterns from the collection, and I always think that highlights all the beauty of the papers. So I have thought of many different ways to use these strips of paper over the years, and I continue to try to think of new ways because I just really love it. So I added some Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide to the edge of those distressed papers, and I distressed these papers quite a bit, and I also rolled them back a little bit. They almost reminded me of like torn Christmas paper, so I thought that would just add to the Christmas spirit. There was one strip of paper that I just didn't think went along with the rest of them, so I grabbed one of the leftover strips of paper and I covered it up. I didn't even bother taking off the other strip because you really can't tell that it's there. And then I took that Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide and I inked all around the outside of the layout. I switched that 4 by 6 inch photo out for these two smaller photos. They measure 3 inches wide by 4 1/4 inches tall, and there's one of each of my daughters. I have both of the photos mounted on some white cardstock, and now I'm using some of the papers that are in the kit, and I am putting another mat behind each of the photos. I use green pattern paper to go behind Julia's photo. She's the one that's on the layout right now. And then I use some red pattern paper to go behind Danielle's picture. Her photo's off to the right now. And then I was thinking that in addition to the mowed lawn, I could bring a little bit more emphasis and attention to the photos if I use a little bit of the Black Soot Distress Oxide. So I inked the edges just of the pattern paper that mats each of the pictures. I wanted to give the photos a little bit of dimension, so I'm using some fun foam to pop them up. As I was adding the foam, I noticed there was a really cute image of a bird on the back of one of the photos, and I really wanted to use that image on the layout. So before I pressed the foam down, I peeled up that piece of pattern paper a little bit. I cut out the image of the bird, and I do actually use that image on this layout. So then I returned the foam and I added a little bit more foam. Now I will let you know that off camera I cut the two pictures in two and I separated the foam because when I looked at it the next day, which was when I continued this layout, I was thinking that I wanted the photo on the right to be a little higher up than the photo that's to the left of it. So that wasn't really that hard to do, but I did want to mention that I did make that change and I had to cut the foam in order to do that. I wanted to add a few more layers behind the photos, so I'm using some of the ephemera pieces that were in the kit. I wanted to give the illusion of having quite a few layers, so I cut some of those cards into smaller pieces, and then I used the leftover pieces to create the appearance of multiple layers. I really like the idea of having the two small photos, but whenever there are two photos or more, it takes me so long to come to a final decision as to where I want to have them on the page, how I want them to be arranged. So I did move these photos around quite a bit, and that's why I don't glue things down right away with liquid glue. I feel like that makes it too final, and I like to have that opportunity to go back and change things, especially after taking a break and then looking at the layout again. A lot of times I will see things that I want to change, and so I like the idea of having repositionable adhesive such as the ATG adhesive. I used some of the packaging and you can see that I tore it and I distressed the edges. I don't end up leaving that piece of striped red and white paper where it is, although I do add some red and white striped paper to the layout. Now I'm inking the edges of some of the tags. There were a whole bunch of tags that were in the kit, and so I thought that they would look nice in a cluster over the tops of the photos. I also added another cluster with a tag, and I'm also going to be adding that red ticket that's off to the left, and I thought that that would help balance the layout so I wouldn't have everything on the right hand side. I'd have a little bit of something on the left hand side. The 49 and Market ephemera pack had lots of tabs in it, and so I added one that said Dear Santa to Danielle's photo, and then one that says Celebrate to Julia's photo, and I put the tab on Danielle's picture a little bit further up than the one on Julia's picture, again trying to balance out the layout. So I added that red ticket, and then I also added a little sentiment that said joy to that smaller cluster. And then on top of the photos, I'm adding the banner that says have yourself a merry little Christmas. And I thought that that fit nicely on top of the photos. And then I added some foam to the back of that sentiment, and I had to put a little extra on the left-hand side so that it would sit flat on the layout. I added some more of those branches with the berries on them on top of the tags. And then there's that little bird. So what I did was I attached the bird down to a piece of white cardstock, and then I fussy cut it out because I wanted it to be a little more sturdy. So I thought that by having the white cardstock behind it, it would be able to be popped up off the layout, or it would just be easier to manipulate. Backing die cuts and fussy cut pieces is something that I do a lot, especially when I pop things up off the layout. It's really not a necessary step, but it's just something that I like to do. I do find with larger pieces that are popped up, they can sometimes sag if they are not backed up with some cardstock. So I'm just in the habit of doing it, but again, it's not necessary. I'm going to make another cluster on the upper left-hand corner. As I had said, there is a lot of weight on the right-hand side of the layout, so I thought that it would be a good idea to add a little bit more to the left-hand side of the layout. I started the cluster out with a banner made from the red and white striped packaging. Since the photo cluster has so many layers, I wanted there to be a lot of layers on this cluster as well. I didn't want this to be very simple, but then the other photo cluster was very detailed. So I used some of the pattern paper to make another banner, and I'm going to layer that on top of the red and white stripe banner. You can see that as I'm going along, I'm inking the edges of, I think, pretty much everything with that mowed lawn Distress Oxide. In that cluster, I'm also going to use those fussy cut bells that you see on the upper left-hand side of the layout right now. I love the Blue Fern Studio papers. They always have so many little images on them, and so I always try to be on the lookout when I'm using those papers for things that I could fussy cut out and include on the layout. Now I have all those banners and the sentiment assembled, and I'm just attaching that up in the upper left-hand corner. I realized that the red and white striped paper was, I guess, the only thing on the layout that didn't have some mowed lawn Distress Oxide on it, so I added a little bit of the Distress Oxide, and then I further distressed that paper. Now, I have a little obsession with poinsettias. I don't know why. Not real poinsettias, not that I don't like real poinsettias, but as far as scrapbooking goes, I just love them for Christmas layouts. The December kit had lots and lots of these poinsettias, so I love these sparkly ones for this layout. I added the poinsettias in 3 different places around the photos, and I also put a small one up by that cluster that has the banners on the left-hand side. I always like to add some extra florals to my layout. I shouldn't say always, but I often do. I just can't get enough stems and branches and leaves on my pages. So this layout is no different. I die cut out some pine branches from some dies that are in my stash. I use some Distress Oxide in mowed lawn to cover the whole die cut. And then I also use some pine needles Distress Oxide to ink the edges of all of the pine needles. And I made quite a few. So now I'm placing them around the poinsettias on the page. And I really think that that adds a nice little touch to the poinsettias. And I pronounce the flowers poinsettias because that's how that's pronounced in my area. But I do hear a lot of people on YouTube videos saying poinsettia, and I can see why, because there is an IA at the end. You can see that I have placed almost all of those pine branches that were off to the right on the layout. There are so many times that I think I'm making extras of the pine branch die cuts or other floral or leaf die cuts to add to my pages, but it turns out that I don't make extras because I end up using all of them. I just feel like it's kind of a more the merrier situation. Now I'm adding some photo corners to my layouts. That's another thing that I do all the time. It's gotten to the point where my eye feels there's something missing if I don't have photo corners on my layouts, and I don't feel that way when I look at other people's layouts, but for me, I just feel that it's a nice little finishing touch. So I use an EK Success scalloped photo corner punch, and I don't see them in the stores anymore. I think they're discontinued, but I frequently see them on eBay. So if you're interested in those, you can usually find them, but there are some other manufacturers that have made photo corner punches over the years, and then there are also lots of dies that make corners for your photos. And not everybody likes that look. That's just if it appeals to you. I also added some mid-size pearls to those 4 photo corners. And then I was thinking that it would look really nice if there was something on each of those tags. Some ribbon I thought would look nice because it's a Christmas layout. So I picked out some ribbon. It's white, but it's kind of transparent. You could see right through it. It's also sparkly, so I thought that would be good for a Christmas layout. And then I added some tiny pearls to the sentiment at the top, and then I started gluing down those pine branches. And you can see that I just put a little bit of glue at the base of the pine branches, and then I added a few more pearls around the page. I put them by the poinsettia clusters, and I added all the different sizes that I had. I think the variety of sizes helps to add interest to the page. In addition to adding the pearl to the background, I thought that it would look nice if there were a couple of them on the pine branches as well, so I added the really tiny pearls to the pine branches. And you can see here that I'm using my scissors to help me place the pearls because they're so tiny I can't really manipulate them with my fingers. But it turned out I did not like those ribbons. I just felt that they weren't substantial enough. The rest of the page is kind of bold with the colors, and I thought that the white was a little bit too subtle, and overall I just didn't end up liking it. So instead I decided to use some bows. I had one red glittery bow that went perfectly with the poinsettias, so I decided to use that on the biggest tag. And then I had some little tiny bows that I bought in the sewing section, and I put the white bows on the smaller tags. I decided to remove that red and white striped paper that was under the photos. I don't really dislike it now that I'm watching the video, but I thought that that scalloped piece of paper would look better. And I wanted to add something to the bottom of the page, but nothing too detailed. So I decided to just add the red and white striped branding strip to the bottom. And that completes this layout. And here are some close-ups of it. I'm very excited to say that this is the last video that I needed to catch up on doing a voiceover for. Now I can take a look at all of your comments and answer those. That's one of my favorite things. Thank you very much for those. Please take a look in the description box. You'll see the link to the My Creative Scrapbook website, and you could see all the current kits there. I hope everybody has a fantastic day. I will see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.